Hello and welcome to the Imelda MarCAST. Our guest today has played in Ulena and Yowie. His latest band, Terms, has released a new record on Skin Graft Records called Asbestos Mouth. Today we're talking to Trull. Hello. Thanks for joining me.
How's it going?
I'm quite all right.
Good to see you. It's been a long time.
It has, yeah. It's been a few years, maybe?
Yeah, it must be.
Oh, wow. I imagine this year you've been busy with preparing for the Terms release, right?
Yeah. It actually kind of changed course midstream because of the pandemic. It's been done for, I don't know, probably since close to the beginning of the year. And we were going to just release it ourselves and then go on tour and then record again after tour, like live, because everything on the record was done long distance, like mailing files back and forth. But since that all sort of fell apart, just sort of simultaneously, I was chatting with Mark at Skin Graft and sent him the files like, oh, hey, here's my new band. We're going to put this record out. And all of a sudden, he was interested in putting it out for us. And that sort of changed our plans. But hopefully when things open up again, we can actually play some shows. And we're already working on new material. So,
oh, nice. Where are you guys planning on touring?
First off, probably just like Midwest. I'd probably be hitting you up for a show in Chicago.
Aw.
But yeah. Oh, sorry. That's my dog. But yeah, probably start off with like some sort of Midwest, maybe East Coast-ish, but definitely just sort of a short regional U.S. jaunt would be, I bet, our first attempt at touring.
Have you guys played in the same room together at all, or has it all been long distance so far?
It's strange to say, but it's all been long distance.
Oh, wow. And this is pre-COVID.
Yeah. Yes, from the beginning. In fact, I don't think we've ever actually met in person.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we chatted a lot years ago when Danny's band Jitters was trying to set up a show with Yowie, but it never came to fruition. And the collaboration was never meant to always be long distance, but it's kind of ending up that way for a longer period than we originally intended. Thanks, pandemic.
And we'll get back into Terms later, but I want to talk about, I guess, your beginning. So if I remember correctly, you had told me that you started out into punk or pop punk. Is that right?
Sort of, yeah. The first bands I was in were starting in like the mid 90s. It was sort of indie rock at the time, which sort of indie has a different meaning now of bespectacled bearded people in waistcoats playing lutes and stuff. But
yeah, fun twee music.
Yeah, at the time it was sort of like Sebadoh and sort of a weird mix of melodic pop elements with sort of trashy punk. But yeah, so I played in a couple bands like that throughout the 90s.
So then how did you get from old school indie to Ulena? Like what happened during that time frame?
Well, I was a huge fan of Dazzling Killman, and I gradually got to know Darren, and we got to be pals and decided to play together. And we started getting together, just the two of us, for probably 6 months or a year at my apartment and just kind of playing together. And then we found Danny and started getting together and playing. And I think we spent 2 years figuring out what it was we wanted to do before we actually played a show. Because all of us had been in bands before, and we knew that sort of trajectory where a new band comes up and everyone's interested to see what they're doing, and then if it doesn't grab people's attention, no one cares anymore. Like no one ever gives those bands a second chance. So we had this sort of diabolical scheme that we were gonna emerge fully formed and just sort of take everyone by surprise. Like we did our best to try to keep it a secret for several years before we started playing shows.
That's a lot of patience. Most people don't have the fortitude to not play a show for that many years.
It could be frustrating. I mean, it definitely got frustrating, especially as we started to get excited about the stuff we were writing. Like, you know, you want to play in front of people and you want to see how it works. And we actually did play a few secret shows during that period. Like basement shows where we wouldn't even be on the bill. If a friend's band was playing, we would kind of sneak on the bill and play a basement show and then go back to the drawing board and figure out what worked and what didn't. So we were kind of being sneaky that way. None of those were actually in town though. We would play secret out of town shows, which seems insane to me now. But it really fit with our plan at the time.
What was the reception to those early secret shows?
I want to say just sort of like bemused confusion. I don't know. I mean, we definitely played in Columbia, Missouri and Bloomington, Illinois doing secret shows. I think those may have been the only ones, and they were both just basement shows at someone we knew's house. I don't know. People were interested, but I'm not sure they knew what to make of what we were trying to do.
I imagine with the type of music that you make, it's not uncommon for people to incorrectly assume that, oh, they're just making it up. They're just improvising. There's a lot of notes. They're just dicking around.
Yeah. During that band's actual lifespan, there weren't that many people that liked us. We had a small pocket of people that were enthusiastic in Chicago and a few people in St. Louis, and we actually toured quite a bit and got mixed reactions. So like a lot of the times we would play hardcore shows and stuff, and the really fast blast beat type stuff would go over well, and then our more sort of abstract things people would wander off. But I always felt like, I don't know, we tried our damnedest, and I think mostly it came across live. But in the situations we were playing in someone's laundry room to 5 people. So there's only so much you can do.
And playing with hardcore bands, I imagine that's a massive juxtaposition, I would think.
It can be. We also we played a few shows with metal bands. Metal crowds seem to get it a bit. Yeah. We played several shows with the Chicago band Yakuza.
Okay.
And I always felt like if we played more metal shows, we probably would have done well, because those audiences seem to relate to the technicality and just the sort of overwhelming sensory overload thing. They're into that.
So like the writing process for Grandulina, all of that is through composed, right? There's no leeway for, maybe I'll change this up like during this show.
Yes and no. It was through composed, but there were open sections that were sort of conceptual. We would write using blocks of improvisation that had a specific zone we would be in. Like we want this part to sound like popcorn or whatever. Like we did a lot of creative visualization, and then there would be a specific cue in and out of it. So it was compositionally the same every time, but the exact thing we played wasn't always the same. And sometimes those sections would morph and change, and depending on what we felt like that night, but there was always the cue out of it. And so we would eventually get back to the form. It really varied. Sometimes we'd stick to the form pretty rigidly, and sometimes things would spiral off in different directions.
What did you value the most about Darren Gray's playing, or how he thought about music, and specifically in the context of Grandulina and working with him?
I mean, there are a lot of answers, but he definitely opened up my palette of what I was comfortable with doing on guitar. When we first started playing, coming from the indie rock type stuff, he used to joke that it was his job to dejanglify my guitar playing. And so there was that, like there was the actual stylistic difference that he sort of helped inspire. And then a lot of he was the only member of that band that had any formal music training. So a lot of the arrangement concepts were learned from him, and then we sort of took off from there. That there wasn't a leader in that band though at all. It was extremely democratic, and a lot of the best ideas came from one of us hating something that was happening and making us change it. But it was always, I mean, that's the thing, is that band when you listen to that record, I don't know if the sort of fun of it comes through. Like we were always we had this almost vaudevillian concept of live performance. And also just, I remember those practices just like laughing until my ribs hurt. Like we would just tell stories and crack each other up, and even do musical jokes to crack each other up. And that's the one thing I don't know if the recordings convey, is just the sort of loose fun we were having with the idea of making this ridiculous music.
And the record Gateway to Dignity, that was recorded in something like 1 or 2 days, right?
We tracked it in 2 days. Yeah. And we had booked 3 days. So on the third day, we recorded that Neo Show EP. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I imagine in such a short time frame, there's not a lot of room for fun. It just feels like you're on the clock.
Yeah, and also having prepared for that for several years, you get nervous and you're trying to nail all these ridiculous parts. And I mean, I'm still extremely proud of how the record turned out, and I'm not sure how you sonically convey fun, I mean, other than making the cover art really silly or something, I'm not sure even how to do that.
And that was recorded at a time when tape was still primarily in use, right? Like early 2000s?
Yeah, we did it on 2-inch tape with Jeremy Lemos at Semaphore in Chicago. I think there are only 2 edits on the whole album. Like everything was played live. I remember there's one song we redid the intro because we thought we could do it better, and we spliced on the intro. And then one song, the last song on the record that's like over 10 minutes long, we ended up recording about 5 or 6 minutes, and then something went wrong and we recorded the second half of it and spliced them together. But it's almost entirely live in the studio, straight to tape. There were a couple overdubs. I think we added an extra snare on a part. I don't think you can even hear it, but we did do a little bit of experimenting. Like there are some sections with distorted drums and weird mixing things, but it's mostly live.
So nowadays, it's very easy to have access to digital recording. So do you miss from having worked with tape that you were forced to commit to a decision, whereas nowadays you could always go back and tweak this and tweak that, and technically you could work on something forever until it's quote unquote perfect?
That's true. And that was something that I had to adjust to in Yowie, because those guys were very into going into the waveform and like scooting things ever so slightly so that it's just that much more precise. I am a fan of human error. I think it sounds sort of more interesting.
Yeah.
When I record my own stuff, like the term stuff is all done on this 15-year-old digital 8-track, and I use it like a tape player. I hit record, I play, I press stop. Like I don't scoot things around or splice takes together. So in a weird way, I'm still working like that, but it's gone digital, and then I can dump it down to my computer and email the files away, and then Danny can splice it up as much as he wants. I don't care. I don't have like a aesthetic line in the sand for that stuff. I just don't really work that way.
Yeah.
Partially because of what you say, I would never finish anything if I started trying to make it perfect, cutting it up, and just it's endless what you can do.
What do you think made Danny McLean unique? What did you enjoy the most about working with him?
Oh my God. Well, I mean, he was one of the most hilarious people I've ever met, and just boundless creativity and energy. It was those practices, especially in the first couple of years of the band, were just incredibly exhausting trying to keep up. I mean, it's hard to verbalize, but I first met him when he was probably 16. He was playing in a band called Detox at the time, and maybe he was older, but he looked young for his age. So he looked like he was like 15 or 16. And I was just sort of impressed with him right away, and sort of got to be friends with him because by happenstance, we were dating girls that were roommates. And that's how I sort of got to know him a little bit and realized he was into things other than just like grindy punk bands. And yeah, I'm really fortunate to have gotten to play with him, because it was those songs, almost every single one of those songs wouldn't exist without him. Like he wasn't just playing drums to our riffs. Like so many of the arrangement ideas and the just crazy directions things would go off in were from him. So yeah, he was a magical musician and hilarious person. And I mean, like anyone, could be frustrating also because he was a strong personality, but I miss him.
Like when you first started working with Darren Gray, was there some initial intimidation, like, this is the dude from Dazzling Killmen and he's playing with me? It's crazy.
I think at the very beginning, so the very first time I played with him, his band You Fantastic did an in-store at the record store here, and they assembled some group of like 20 people or something to wander throughout the store while playing the parts, not in sync, but just sort of this weird experience happening type thing. And he asked me to play that. And so after that, we did another thing where it was him solo, but he wrote this half an hour long piece, and he asked me to play guitar on that. And I think I was pretty intimidated at that time because I was like, oh, I have to learn some half an hour thing that this like super great musician wrote, but it was totally cool. And we worked together really easily. And after that, we just kind of started getting together to work on stuff and work on ideas. And it happened really naturally.
What did we work on between Grandulina and Yowie?
Not a whole lot. Well, Grandulina never broke up.
Mm-hmm.
We stopped playing together for a variety of reasons, some musical, some personal. And I was always kind of holding out hope that we would start back up again. I know Darren did too. After Danny passed away, for obvious reasons, that hope went away. So I'm trying to think of what I did. I actually recorded a couple solo albums, one of which is on Bandcamp. There are a couple other ones. They were all done really quickly, and they're not that great. I don't think so. So I put the one that I think is the best up on Bandcamp, but I feel like I was playing all the time, but I wasn't playing in bands or playing out. I was just kind of trying to figure out what I was going to do next if the band I wanted to be in wasn't going to get back together.
You think anyone could ever fill in for Danny if Grandulina were to reunite?
I don't think we would reunite as a band. I could conceive of if we did some kind of tribute or something, playing with someone. Actually, Darren and I very briefly talked about, we were inspired by the Sun City Girls did a tour after their drummer died, and the guitarist and bass player played on stage with his drum set up, but no one playing it. And we kind of thought something like that would be interesting, but it never came to anything. We have some recordings that we'd like to at some point assemble into a final album, but we haven't gotten that completed or even really started yet.
Oh, come on, we need to hear it.
I mean, it's part of it is it's really good stuff, and we want it to come out, but we want to do it right. And
yeah,
there's varying degrees of sound quality, and it's going to take a lot of work. So we want to do it right. So we're kind of letting it sit until the time is right that we can devote the effort required to it.
Ah, that's good to hear.
It'll someday it will see the light of day.
Well, that's fantastic. How did you first come into contact with Yowie?
Well, I was vaguely aware of them. They kind of started playing shows probably around the time Grandulina was maybe winding down. It was at least a few years into our existence. In all honesty, I didn't pay a lot of attention to them at first. I really didn't pay that much attention until Sean messaged me and said, hey, do you know anyone that you think would be able to play Yowie songs? And at the time, I guess it was maybe 6 months after Danny died, and I was feeling a little directionless in terms of what I was going to do next. So I just kind of was like, I could probably do it. And that set the course for the next 6 years of my life.
Oh, wow.
Like a very sort of quick decision that I probably should have given more thought to.
Yeah, 6-year commitment. How did you go about learning Jimbo's parts? Like, did he sit down with you and show you some stuff, or were you just kind of left to your own devices? Like, yeah, here's a recording.
Yeah, I was given recordings of, well, it started with the second record because they had just tracked Damning with Faint Praise, and it wasn't even mixed yet. And that's actually what made me want to join, was I thought that record was really good, and I was excited about learning those songs. And they gave me recordings, and they gave me charts of all the meter changes, and I was given the freedom to basically just write my own parts. I tried to retain as much of the character of Jim's parts on the record as I could. At least the thing that sounded like the riff to me, I try to retain, but some of those parts are so abstract. It took a bit of interpretation. So yeah, the actual process involved loading those mixes they gave me into a software, like an audio software, so I could loop little tiny sections, because you can't just press play and play along and learn those songs. Like, you have to learn them one like micro riff at a time. So it took roughly a month per song of working on them every day.
That's one hell of a hobby.
I mean, at the time I was looking for something to focus my energy on it, and it came at a good time for me. It was a good project. And then, so when they first asked me to play with them, the deal was, we just recorded this record, the guitar player's quitting, we have a chance to go do, at the time it was going to be a European tour with Ruins. It didn't wind up, it didn't wind up being with Ruins, but so that was the thing, is we need a guitarist in the band because we want to go to Europe. I was like, I'd like to go to Europe. So, and that did end up happening, not with Ruins, but the European tour. And so that was kind of the first goal in learning these songs, is, okay, we're going to get the band up to speed, and then the record will come out and we can go tour Europe. But simultaneously with learning the old songs, we started writing things together. And then that material started to seem like I wanted to see it through. So the sort of not quite hired gun situation, but I didn't feel super committed to this band I wasn't in and didn't write before, until we started writing music together. And then I felt like I had to see it through. I didn't really realize it was going to take 6 years to finish a record. I may have made a different decision if I knew that beforehand.
And having played in Grandulina, you're clearly not lazy when it comes to work ethic, but it seems that even just having to adjust the Yowie work process seemed like a lot.
Oh yeah, it was a very different process. Even though I think very superficially, it's the music is in the same ballpark, but the working method is extremely different. So it was a big adjustment. And I do feel like I learned valuable things about learning how to do things the Yowie way. I don't think I would want to do that in another band in the future, just because it's so arduous. But I'm happy to have done it. But that's kind of why, once that record came out and we did another European tour and we played some shows, we kind of got to that point where it was time to start writing more material again. And I kind of felt like I have to leave now or I'm going to get locked into another 6 years. And it just sort of started to take up too much of my life. And that's when I decided to leave.
So the Yowie work process, is it more like top down, where the general structure of a song is decided first, or is it more like bottom up, where you take this very basic building block and then try to elaborate on that, or some combination of the two?
It's bottom up always. It's always the tiniest fragment that you work on and come up with different variations, and then you assemble a large collection of these little micro riffs, and you start experimenting with what goes with what, and if one riff could lead into the next, and they sort of start to become little clusters, and then they grow. I don't want to say the songs write themselves, because they don't, but there is an internal logic to it where the riffs start to sort of appear connected and you can start to put them together. And it does take a really long time, especially on that Synchromysticism record. We were trying to make all of the transitions flow really naturally, so it wouldn't have that jump cut feel. Their first record is very jagged, riff. Like we wanted sort of the opposite of a smooth flow, which is actually a lot harder to do with very jagged parts to make them seem smooth. So that took the longest, was just the arrangements and coming up with transitions between, because we would have these sections that we really liked and we thought, oh, that section basically goes with this other section, but getting from one point to the other sometimes would take months and months of attempts and revisions, and it was a very slow process.
So it sounds like the Yowie process involves a lot of trying to fit together these jigsaw pieces and exploring the possible permutations. So given that very detailed process, the music still has very much a groove and a flow to it. So how do you, so I imagine it's a lot of work taking something that seems starting with this rote sort of process and making it have a feel.
That's a huge part of the challenge. And some of that comes from, a lot of it is the arrangement. And then after that, a good portion of it is just being so familiar with playing it that you can sort of flow within your own performance from part to part. It's not easy.
What did you enjoy the most about working with Sean and Jeremiah?
It was always a challenge. I think the writing process was ultimately very rewarding. It was extremely frustrating during the writing process. The bulk of that record was written with just Sean and I, basically alone in his basement. Jeremiah lived out of town for a good portion of it. I kind of think of it as Sean and I co-wrote it, and Jeremiah contributed some arrangement ideas. But I think sort of learning how they work and learning how to work within that was a rewarding challenge. It's not necessarily my preferred way of working, and I did kind of feel like I was banging my head against a wall a good portion of the time. But I'm glad I learned how to do that, and I feel like it gave me some tools that I didn't have in how to structure music going forward.
All right, moving on to Terms. So I don't know how to say his name properly. The drummer of Terms,
Danny Piechocki.
Danny Piechocki also played in Jitters. Now I'm messing up the flow. Probably cut this part out, me being a jackass. All right, let's see. Let's look at my notes. So on the Terms record, you also play bass, right?
Yes.
So like I
was going to say, I actually, bass is my first instrument. I started on bass. So anytime I get the opportunity to put bass on something, I'm pretty excited because it's kind of it's my home away from home. I just sort of ended up playing guitar because I accidentally got better at it than the other people in the bands I was in at the time. So I just ended up a guitar player by default.
You're such a precise and efficient guitar player that I never would have thought that you started out in bass.
I don't precise and efficient is kind of what you want in a bass player, isn't it?
Oh, I guess so. I guess I haven't worked with enough bass players.
There's a whole way bass players hear things, and I don't really consider myself a bass player anymore, but it's really interesting when you talk to bass players about rhythm and how things sit on the beat and how they think of pushing and pulling things. There's a lot to bass playing that I think people don't realize is there. It's interesting. I don't know.
Yeah, so it's not just tracing the guitar's root notes.
Yeah, you're not, and I'm certainly not saying I am capable of all this. I played bass in the early 90s and haven't done it much since, but it's still kind of, it's just fun. It's still like maybe more fun to me than playing guitar.
So when Terms will eventually do live shows, will there be like a fill-in bass player or no?
Possibly. I feel like we could do it as a two-piece, and we might. I would like to have the option of bass players or whatever instrument filling in. I kind of like the idea of it being Danny and I plus whoever we might decide to bring along. So I don't know. I mean, I've tried to figure out how I would do it just as a two-piece. I think some songs would work better than others, but it's a little bit of an open question at this point. I think we could do it either way, as a two-piece or with various fill-in members, just for fun. So
having worked with the Ulena methodology and the Yowie method, how did that shape how you worked on the material for Terms?
I think there is a combination of the two concepts at work in Terms. There's definitely a lot of interlocking polyrhythmic riffs that's the kind of stuff I probably wouldn't have constructed, at least purposely, before having done that kind of stuff in Yowie. Now I sort of hear it. I hear if I'm writing a riff in a certain time, I'll start to hear how other times could potentially interact and start experimenting with that. That's something that definitely came from particularly working with Sean, just because he's always thinking in polyrhythms, and like a riff is never just a riff. It's got to have, well, what can interact with that riff? And, it becomes this like interlocking gear thing that starts to become a Frankenstein monster. But I also wanted to use the sort of slightly looser, slightly more intuitive method that we used in Ulena, which, not that band wasn't precise, it was definitely precise, but it was less purposely mathematical than the Yowie stuff. We didn't really, other than when we were first learning riffs, we never really counted anything in Ulena. We kind of would do things by feel. And so there's a bit of a combination of the two approaches. And it's not conscious. It's just kind of the way my brain now works, having had those experiences and the experiences of playing in goofy indie pop bands. Like, I do still try to write riffs that are catchy to me. Like that's still kind of important, is to me at least, is not just writing technically interesting music, but also something that you'll remember if you hear it once and want to hear it again. At least that's what I'm going for.
I think like you're playing on Synchromysticism, like the guitars are way, I guess, hookier than like previous Yowie records. So, and like, I guess this leads to a question I should have asked earlier. What do you think is like the lasting contribution that you made to Yowie?
Well, I mean, the existence of that record is the contribution, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, co-writing and playing on it. Those songs would sound different with a different guitar player, because I would always try to sneak a little bit of skewed melody into those songs, just because it's what I like to hear. And I think just sort of, just rhythms against each other are cool, but if you can also have a little hooky earworm on top of it, that's a bonus. That makes at least me want to go back and hear it again.
It's probably the catchiest Yowie record, I think.
That's good. And I think there's a progression between the first and the second and the third that you can hear. There's more hooky parts on the second one. I mean, the first one, there's a few little catchy parts, but it's mostly just sort of a barrage. Yeah. And the second one, they started to introduce some little hints of melody, and just my different style. I mean, Jim is a pretty unique individual, so no one's going to recreate his style.
Yeah, I think Sean described his playing as he's an alien on fire.
Yeah, hearing, especially when they sent me those mixes and I could hear his isolated tracks, there were times I just would shake my head. What is even happening? Is that even a guitar? I don't know how to do that, so I'm just going to do something else. It was impressive. And also just hearing stories about how he essentially would never play the same thing twice.
Yeah.
Which was kind of good, because it freed me up to just write my own parts, because I figured if he was there, he wouldn't play the part he played on the record anyway. So I'll just play what I want to play and have it fit.
Shifting back to terms. So for the writing process, would you and Danny be sending each other like bits of ideas, or like would you send him like a full track of just guitar?
I usually will send him a song, like a recording of a song with different instruments, like if there's multiple guitars and bass, and then I tell him, do whatever you want, loop parts, expand parts, delete parts, I don't really care. And invariably when they come back to me, he's improved them. So some of my favorite parts on the record are things that he expanded and changed the way I had it arranged when I sent it to him. And so I would say I write the initial rough form, and then it's a collaboration after that, how it ends up getting put together.
So there's a trust there that if you give him something, he will improve on it.
Yeah, he hasn't let me down yet.
You've improvised in like one-off projects, like a little bit, right?
Actually, quite a bit. And I'm also in an improvising duo with a violinist, Alex Cunningham, called Apathist, that we've recorded a couple things. Yeah, I enjoy improvising and doing, I don't know, one-off collaborations, and also just improvising groups where you can sort of get to know playing with certain people. Yeah, it's definitely something I like. It's less represented in my recorded discography than probably how often I do it in real life.
Do you have like an overarching philosophy or approach to how you improvise?
No licks. Try not to play the guitar.
So you're not going to do like a blues riff or anything like that?
Yeah.
Like something like jammy?
Try to avoid all jamming and go for more of a textural, I don't know how to describe it, but I wouldn't say I have a overarching concept, but it's kind of more of a taste thing. I try to play in a way that I would want to hear. So
like across your playing, your guitar sound has primarily been like a clean signal, like very reduced pedal setup, right? Yeah, I have a bunch of pedals and have fun playing with them, but it's almost always been necessity, because the bands I've been in, just playing the songs required so much effort that trying to step on a bunch of pedals at the right time was impractical. So it's kind of been by necessity. And also just,
I remember at the very beginning of Granulina, we were talking about whether or not we would want to use pedals. And Darren said something about, so, well, if you write a song where you have to use the pedal and that pedal breaks, the song is gone.
Yeah.
And so we decided, like, well, we're not going to rely on some gizmo to be able to play a song. And we just would figure out extended techniques and different ways to make weird sounds with our instruments instead of stepping on something on the floor. And I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with pedals.
Yeah.
I love pedals, but especially for a live sort of frantic rock band, I don't like to have to mess with them because there's just too many points of failure.
Yeah. I'm learning that the hard way, unfortunately. I will say that, like, seeing you use a volume pedal and seeing Chris D of the Conformists also use one, it's really made me interested in how that could be used, like, for my own purposes. So yeah, I kind of blame you for that. Like, do I need a volume pedal? Damn it. No.
That is one thing that I sort of feel like I can't live without. Darren and I both used volume pedals in Granulina, and I used one throughout Yowie, and it's kind of like an extension of my body at this point. And a lot of it comes from, I don't know if it's apparent at all in the music I make, but I listen to a lot of old, like, Western swing and pedal steel guitar players. And I got the opportunity to play with the really awesome pedal steel player, Susan Alcorn. And I was playing with her and I realized how many little pedal steel tricks and affectations I have cribbed over the years. Yeah, it's something that snuck in just because it's music I like, and I grab little ideas even though the style of music is completely different.
I never would have thought that inspiration was in there, the pedal steel.
Oh my God. Listen to Speedy West. That's my recommendation.
I'm gonna write that
down.
Right
Jimmy Bryant and Speedy West, the records they did together. They're so good. Danny used to get in the Granulina van. Danny used to get mad at Darren and I when we would listen to country because he would get so mad. Why do you like this? I don't understand. And I don't like any modern country really at all, but the old hot Western swing stuff is super good.
Well, I learned something new today. That's fantastic. What's your current pedal setup?
My current pedal setup. Well, there's a volume pedal I use. It's I'm not sure how you pronounce it. It's like Lehle, Lehle. They make switchers and stuff, but they also make a really nice volume pedal, and I use that. I do use an overdrive. It's the small sound, big sound, fuck overdrive. That is all over the Terms record. That's almost every guitar track, and some of the bass tracks are going through that. There's a whole pile of them over to my right, so I'm just looking at them. But those are the main things I use pretty much every time I play. There's a ton, I have a ton of fuzzes that I'll use for overdubs and different little texture things. I have a Ghost Effects Warm Jets, which is supposed to be a clone of the fuzz that Eno used on Here Come the Warm Jets.
Oh, cool.
And that sounds really good. That shows up on the Terms record a couple places.
Is there like a pedal in your collection that you're just dying to like figure out how to get this to work in Terms?
Like how to incorporate it?
Yeah.
Not really. On the newer stuff we've been recording, I've been using a lot of vibrato just on sort of mixing tracks and giving them a little bit of wobble. There's a really cool pedal, the Fairfield Shallow Water, that I've been using on a lot of the tracks just to give it kind of like makes it seem like a dirty old cassette tape. And it's sort of an addictive sound. I've been using that a bit, but yeah, nothing I've been trying to shoehorn in and haven't had any luck or anything like that.
What's your practice regimen like for working on Terms material?
Well, I work full time. So usually if I'm lucky, I'll come home from work, walk my dog, and then get to play for like an hour. So usually about an hour a day, I'll sit and try to write. And if nothing's happening in terms of, ideas coming to me, I'll work on etudes or scales or something just to kind of keep my fingers nimble. Yeah, usually just come home from work, hang out with my dog, hang out with my wife, try to find a little bit of time to work on it. The days of me practicing hours and hours and hours a day, which I did at one point in my life, those days are gone.
What's the last song that got stuck in your head? And it was so prevalent that you had to kind of figure it out how to play it on guitar in order to get it out of your head.
Trying to remember the name of this song. It's a country song. it's called Baby Guitar. I'm trying to remember the name of the artist. I'll find it. I'll email it to you if I can't remember the name of the artist, but it's called Baby Guitar, and it's got this really fast legato line. It almost sounds like something Robert Fripp would play. I worked out most of that. I didn't bother to learn the entire song, but I got far enough where I felt like, oh, okay, I can play that.
So what does 2021 look like for you? What's going to happen?
Oh, geez, I don't know. 2021 seems maybe overly hopeful for live shows. Keep recording Terms material and put together. I guess it'll be another album. I don't know. Right now we have like 9 in progress tracks. Maybe it'll be a double album. I don't know. It's kind of an open question at this point. I don't even really, other than going to work and coming home, I don't like to leave my house anymore. So I don't know. Maybe 2022 is more of a realistic, we'll go back on tour expectation.
Have you and Danny considered doing like a live stream show or anything like that?
We made a couple videos since this started, but we haven't tried to do a live stream thing. I'm not sure how that would work with lag and all that, but I don't know. I mean, we could probably do like an improvised thing, but it seems like playing complicated songs over Skype or whatever might not work.
That's pretty much all of my questions. Is there anything else you'd like to promote aside from Terms? Or
no, check out that Apathist record if you want. We made a full length called Swallowing Spiders if you want to hear the more the improvised abstract playing that I've done. Yeah, nothing to promote. It was nice to talk to you.
All right. Well, thanks so much, man. Take care, and I hope to see you around sooner rather than later.
Yeah, hopefully we can play a show together someday.
That would be awesome.